Hey everybody. I'm going to wait just a few minutes and let people hopefully come on in and join us. But today we are going to be discussing chapters 3, 4, 5, and 6 of our book from our book study, From Striving to Thriving. I hope you're enjoying the book. So far, it's actually pretty good. It's been very interesting to me, some of the things I've been reading. It's almost like a compilation of all the things that we've learned over the last few years. While we're waiting for people to come on in, if you will look, I believe it is above me, I can never remember, in the post description, there's several things that I'm going to be talking about in the live tonight. And there's going to be a freebie example for you. There's going to be a freebie from a past blog post. There's going to be something on sale just for you guys, and a blog post that I'm going to be highlighting and just kind of mentioning in our talk today. So because I was not able to get live last week. My husband is like the techie person in our family. I am like horrible at technology. It's very ironic that I do this because I'm horrible at this, and my husband does it all behind the scenes. I couldn't even tell you. I was like, I don't even know how to turn it on. And when he works late, he's an accountant. Sometimes he works late. I'm like, I have no idea where to even start. So he was late. He wasn't able to help me set up. That's why we had to cancel it. So we are basically combining two meetings into one. And as a result, this may go a little bit longer. So if you're not able to stay the whole time, that's fine. You can hop out and you can come back and watch it in the replay after it finishes going live, and that's fine too. If you would go ahead, if you had any questions, I know Chris Eller had mentioned several questions in when I posted in the group about saying what time it was today. She had some really good questions to discuss in the live, so I'll be trying to address those. Either if you have any extras or if you want to drop them in the questions, go ahead and put them in there so I can see them, because sometimes it takes a while for me to see the feed. I don't see it immediately. But some chapters I'm going to have a lot more to say about than others, to be honest with you, because some of them I felt like they were stuff that I tried to really focus on the things that I found profound, interesting, and something relatable. If it's something I felt like I'd already heard a million times, I didn't mention it as much. So I pulled this quote out, and I thought it was a good one. It said the 2005 National Assessment of Educational Progress Report, the NAEP, demonstrated that students in the classroom with well-designed libraries interact more with books, spend more time reading, demonstrate positive attitudes toward reading, and exhibit higher levels of reading achievement. And that kind of basically is a summary of everything they're going to in this whole reading, what is it, voluminous? I can't even say the word. I can read it, but I can't say it. But large amounts of reading, and how getting children a time to actually be in their books will provide an opportunity for them to practice the skills that they're teaching them every day, and they'll become more proficient readers. So I thought that was a great example of what it's all about. And the other one, I thought that this is the one where I think I wrote like a cuss word next to, because I was like, dang, because I thought it was interesting. It said John Guthrie and Nicole Humanek in 2004 found that assuring students access to an array of interesting texts, sorry, I had typos in here because I did it quickly, produces reading achievement gain roughly 4 times as large as the small effects of systemic phonics instruction or systematic phonics instruction, as reported by the National Reading Panel in the year 2000. So basically what they're saying is giving children time to read is going to be producing a gain roughly 4 times as large as explicit phonics instruction. And I found that amazing, because I know that when we have students that struggle in reading, one of the things you do in RTI is you automatically work on the phonics, you work on decoding skills, and you work on sight words. And I think there is a time and a place for it, because I don't think you should be throwing the baby out with the bathwater by any means. But what that they're saying is just having the access to text and the opportunity to read is going to give students greater gains than the systematic phonic instruction. I was like, wow. So Chapter 3, big ideas. They said the big ideas were building a classroom library, doing book talks, and sending home books. And this is one of the chapters that I probably enjoyed the most out of what I've read so far, because I have a passion for building a classroom library, and I've always felt it was important. There's been studies that have been done where it's just literally that the more books you have in your classroom available to students, the higher the students will achieve. It's like a direct correlation between the two, and this just kind of proves it. But I like here how they discuss that it's not just the number of text you have available, but it's quality, interesting, engaging text that they can read, which I found interesting. So they talked about this phrase, which is called book formats with appealing low effort to reward ratios. And I haven't heard that term before. That was a new term to me. We had always called it, in my reading program when I did my master's, it called what do we call it? High readability, high engagement, low readability. It's like a high-low text. I'm getting the phrase wrong, but we always called it like a high-low text is basically what we always called it. So I thought that was a different with the low effort to reward ratio. I thought was fancy. So they talked about compendiums, how-to or procedural books, anthologies, bound sets, infographics, joke books, interactive books, not nooks, sorry, free verse, graphic novels, and a huge whole area on nonfiction. So one of the things that I thought that we could talk about is we could talk about some books in general. So we're going to come back to that in just a minute, and like books that we could put in our own classroom library. They also went into, and in this one they didn't talk about the low effort to reward ratios, and remind me to come back to something in the very top because I have a treat for you guys up there. They talked about series and how series can be what basically turns a striver to a thriver. It can be that key moment to get a child hooked on books, because it is a series. It has tons of accessible text. Like there could be like, the Babysitter Club. That was my like watershed book is what they call it. It was a key text that turned me into a reader, because you had like, what is it, like, I remember I got into like 50 something of the books, like the first 50 of them in the series. There are page turners because there are so many of them. Because they're predictable, because you already are aware of the characters, it becomes a predictable text to you, which means it's easier to comprehend. And sometimes it has the same structure, like in the Magic Treehouse books, they always go in the treehouse and are always transported somewhere, so it's a predictable structure. It becomes a community of readers where, if everybody's reading Magic Treehouse books, it gives you something to talk about with them, so you become this like club of readers that have something in common. But the thing that they talked about I thought was very interesting is they said, beware of commonly associated grade level series. For example, Magic Treehouse is almost always associated with second grade, which is fine. But if you have a fifth grader that is reading Magic Treehouse, well, they could, the kid next to them might say, hey, I read that 3 years ago. It was great. And that does nothing to help the striving reader. It does just actually the opposite. So I thought that was interesting. And they actually mentioned maybe holding back certain series and certain books so that they're assigned to certain grade levels. And that was something that when I taught, like in 2005, we had talked about, and when I taught fourth grade, about actually holding back certain titles and assigning them only to fourth grade, and fifth grade would get these books. And part of it was for that reason, which I thought was interesting, very interesting. Now, one of the things I want to talk to you guys about, if you look up in the very top, it says, grab your free high-low reading passage here. And what I did is I really feel like it's very hard to find accessible text with that high-low, high engagement, low readability for your struggling readers, especially in the areas of nonfiction. I feel like we're trying, like I feel like that's an area that's building, but it's hard and it's expensive to build a library. So what I did is I wrote, it's an article, and I tried to make it look as much like a magazine article as possible. And it's, my idea was to take common, like, engaging questions that children may have. And I've come up with a couple few, like the first one is, why does a tiger have stripes? And so I wish I should have put it on here so you can't see it unless you go out and you open it, but it's an article that is leveled. In the bottom right corner, it's going to say end first, beginning, or early second, and mid second. It is for those approximate levels. So it all looks the same, but the readability of the text is different. There's lots of photographs. There's lots of text features, which we're going to talk about later, of text features and signposts. I tried to include as many as I could. Just something to catch teach kids. And I was thinking if that's something that you guys like, I'd be willing to write more. I came up with like, what do anteaters actually eat? Why does a snake shed its skin? So I had several already ideas for like questions kids ask that they might want the answers to, that may be harder for them to read. So it would be in this whole genre of a high-low text. So if you like that, I have the 3 levels in color and black and white. You can click above and grab yours for free. So it's like a 16-page freebie. I think it was pretty big. Now, the power of a book talk. Oh, I love this. And this is something that I tried to do as much as possible in my classroom. And it was something that I did really well for a while, and then it kind of faded out of favor, and I didn't do it as much. And they really talked about a lot here. And they said to display the books, include a variety of levels, formats, genres, do it frequently. They even said every day at one point. And I love the idea of keeping lists of the books that you've done a book talk on so kids could go back and refer to it later. One of the things they didn't mention, I always found when I did book talks, it became a problem with having, like, kids would get so excited about it, they would all want to read it, and I wouldn't have enough copies of it. So we'd have to do a waiting list, which is not necessarily a bad thing. So I was always like, you know, how many copies should you have of it? I don't know. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Do you do book talks with your kids, and how frequently do you do them? I know I did them more frequently when I taught upper grades, 4th and 3rd, than I did in 2nd, but I should have done them looking back more in 2nd as well. Another thing that I did was a book pass, and I did that in the very beginning of 2nd grade, and I have a blog post on it from a million years ago, and I should have included it, and I think about it. And in that, I would put like a basket of books for kids at each table, and they would use that time to flip through the book. And it's like a book tasting. It's where the book tasting idea came from. And it's just a simpler version of it. But kids would look at the book, and they would write down if they wanted to read it or not. And because I did that in 3rd and 4th grade, and kids could write down the titles, so it was easier. And then they had this list of books that they wanted to read next or were interested in. So it kind of helped with that volume of reading and always knowing what's going to happen next. When I did it in 2nd grade, because not everybody was as fast at writing, and fine motor may be an issue because I co-taught in a 2nd grade classroom, I did photographs. I collected a ton of books, and I took photographs of the covers, and they would circle the covers that they wanted to read. And I had one basket of books per table, and we just rotated, and they circles the ones that they wanted to read. And then when we were done, I put the baskets at the front of the room, and they could pull from the baskets to read. It was super easy for me, and then making the picture cover. That was the only time consuming part. The rest of it was super simple, and the kids loved it. So let's talk about, what would your favorite books be for a book talk? And so I pulled some that maybe we might be able to talk about together. If you have any book titles that you would like to share that are just great books, you go ahead and put the title on the bottom. And I thought we could create like this master list of quality text for kids. So one of the ones that my daughter, she's going into 2nd grade, and she absolutely loves, are these Dogman books. They're by Dave Pilkey, and it's kind of in the same genre as Captain Underpants, with a silly, gross humor. It's not that terrible, to be honest with you, but it is the graphic novel, which is very popular, and it makes her feel like she's an advanced reader because it is such a long chapter book. So there's several. There's Dogman, A Tale of Two Kitties, and there's another one. I know there's at least 3 in the series, and I just couldn't find it in her book basket. Oh, wait. Oh, I did pull it. Dogman Unleashed is another popular one. So if you're looking for text for boys, I can already tell you this is be high engagement for most boys. If you're looking for an advanced reader, she's enjoying also these Nancy Clancy series. They're like a chapter book, and it's probably 2nd to 3rd grade. It's a little bit on the high end, and it's a chapter version of Fancy Nancy, so she's enjoying that. Another one that I pulled, if you have some struggling readers that enjoy nonfiction, Seymour Simon is famous for his nonfiction books, and many of them tend to be like they're picture books, and they look small, but they're very, very wordy in text, and they have few text features. He does have a few of these leveled readers that look like this, where if you open it, the readability is much more friendly for kids, if you can see that. It's got, you know, more white space in between lines. It's, you know, and spacing, larger font, that kind of thing. So these are things some of your boys may be interested in as well. Another one Love me some Scaredy Squirrel. I had a harder time going through my books that I've pulled out because I had a huge classroom library, and over time, when I left the classroom, I boxed a lot of that up, and I only pulled out my favorite read alouds because that's what I figured I'd be using the most of. So I don't have as much of my library collection as I used to. It's all boxed up. So this is not as much as I could show you. But I love the story of Scaredy Squirrel. It has the pictures are so engaging. Melanie Watts is hysterical in her books. I know she also wrote You're Finally Here, which a lot of people like to use for the beginning of school year. Scaredy Squirrel Makes a Friend. Scaredy Squirrel Goes to the Beach. It's another example of a series. We also got Click Clack Moo is always a good one. Doobie Doobie Moo. Giggle Giggle Quack. Doreen Cronin writes several books, and I like that. Same example, there's not as much text for the page, so it's going to make it easier. If you have some kids that are really interested in nonfiction, I love these Steve Jenkins books. He some of his books are a little higher, so maybe hard to read, but this one's not quite as bad because it's bite-sized pieces and so much of it is supported by the picture. But this is Actual Size is the title of it, and it said this is like the example of an atlas moth, and the atlas moth is actually that size versus the dwarf goby, which is the smallest fish, which is actually this size. So the things in the book show the actual size of that animal. My kids always loved this one. It was the fold out of a, see it? It was the fold out to show the saltwater crocodile and how long its mouth was. So that was one they adored. So that's just a couple that I found were in pretty good rotation in my own classroom library. And I had tons of others. I wish I could pull out my boxes, but they're buried in my garage. So if you will start just dropping comments and leaving your books, we will create a title of books. And I know when we do questions, we'll talk about also more about book selection because I had some examples, especially of boy books. Chris mentioned wanting to know what to do with boy books and a couple other things, so I'll come back to that. But I want to try to get through all this good stuff. So make sure if you have a great book title, especially not only if it'd be great for the classroom library, but if it's great for a book talk where it's just a solid good book that kids would like. Picture books, joke books, anything that's good. So another thing they talked about is sending home books was a big idea, and how you can do this. That means you take books from your own library, you send them home, you encourage library circulation of the school library, and you also the local community library and getting a library card. It was interesting what they said. They basically said it was worth the possibility of losing the books. That was the bottom line in their argument. I had over the years collected some books that were like reading A to Z ones that I didn't really mind if I got lost over time. And I've written several books myself that I sent home that are available in some of my reading programs. It was interesting. It sounded like they more encouraged not necessarily guided reading text and decodable text, but really true examples of children's literature and trade books are what they really encouraged. And they also encouraged not to send home like the junky books in your library that you were like, if it gets lost, I don't really care, because they basically implied that it was offensive, and we really need to, for these striving readers, really hook them with the best of the best. And that means the best, newest, freshest, most interesting, not your tea-stained, wrinkled books, which I thought was interesting. So, and that is an example. I'm going to go back to saying that is something that I would hope that your school would support you in, because that is a big financial burden on an individual teacher. So that would be a great example to really encourage the school staff and administration to get behind. And it said, while we should monitor and guide all students' book choices, it's particularly important that we check to see that striving readers are well matched to their books in their backpacks and be equipped to read them. So we want to make sure it's things that they can go home and read on their own, because we don't know what kind of home support they have. They may or may not be able to read them on their own. They may not have a parent that is even able to read them at night. Maybe they work night shift. So we just need to be sensitive to that whatever they pick, they can actually read. And chapter number 4, so that was chapter 3, that's probably my longest chapter. They talked about trusting the book and the reader, building in time to read, and removing barriers to volume. So basically, giving students the opportunity for choice in book selection, building in time to read, and removing barriers to volume, and giving them access to large amounts of books. And the trust the book and trust the reader, it was interesting because that was a very, very small part of that chapter. And it's a pretty bold statement, I felt, when they talk about making sure to match books to readers. So I felt like that was an interesting statement, but not much was said about it. So in that chapter, I didn't feel like everything I read, I was like, yeah, nothing big. I felt like that was all things we'd already heard. One of the things they talked about in chapter 5 is all about matching the book to the reader. And I found some more interesting things in this one. And this is also going to help with trusting the book and trusting the reader. And they talked about watershed books and what a watershed book is. And I'm going to define that for you in just a minute if you can't remember, because I'd never heard that term before. Making and monitoring book choices and setting up kids to read outside of school were the 3 big ideas in that chapter. And so they defined a watershed book. It said, but given that they referred to the story of a child named Ramon who had basically gotten hooked on a book. And so that's the scenario that they're referring to from earlier. It says, but given the torrent of engaging reading it launched, we think of it more of a watershed book. There is no turning back for Ramon, no subsequent dry spell or slump, but rather a continuous stream of engaging reading that terraformed him. No, he's not land. Transformed him. Watershed reading experiences are the catalysts that transformed many readers from striving to thriving. For me, it was the Babysitter's Club series and 4th to 5th grade. That was my watershed series, which I thought was interesting. Talked a lot about matching books to readers, and they had several different ideas with next up books, always having a plan in place. I'm knocking over some of my next up books. What are you going to read next? They would do preview stacks, book instructions, and that's when they would sit in with the kids in conferences, increasing volume with reading ladders and creating custom books. So next, a lot of what I found in this, if you are not doing a true reading workshop model, all of this will be very, very difficult because most of this is done within a reading conference. And so if you spend like most of your reading block, if you do, like in the past, I did whole group, I did guided reading, and I did that for the majority of that independent practice time, and kids did different rotations, and then I did a closing time and where we did our share. So that was basically how I set it up. Some years I tried to fit in that guided reading block conferences, but I always felt it was very hard to fit guided reading and conferences within that block because time was an issue. And I really feel like the way that they're approaching this is they're placing an emphasis on conferences as being the main vehicle for instruction and supporting it with strategy and small group instruction. And I have tried that, and I feel like I can be the best teacher for the children, and the children get what they need from me and are able to become stronger readers when I do guided reading instruction. It's just something that I feel better about, and I think I feel more confident in that, but I don't think everybody has to do it that way. And so if you are able to make it work in your schedule where you do a mix of guided reading, small group instruction, strategy group instruction, and independent conference times, I would love to see your schedule and how you plan out your time and how long your reading block is, because that is something I know I struggled with, and I would imagine I'm not alone in that. So all this was really done within reading conferences for kids. That next up book, what are you going to read next? The preview book is where the teacher had selected books that they felt the children may like based on their interest. Book instruction, that was where they would sit down, and maybe if it was a striving reader, they would help the child get started with the book to help establish some basic comprehension of where the book is taking place, and was it in the future, was it in the past, who is the main character so far, just basic ideas. And I'm going to talk about book letters in a minute. I like the idea of a book letter, and that because it was a very a thoughtful process, and it was a very intense version. If you like this, you might like this, but it wasn't like, if you like this, here's your next book. It was a specific gradual build with books that would meet each child's interest, and it was pretty intense. And then there's actually they referred to a professional book that was pretty much, it sounded like, all examples of book letters. So if you wanted to see somebody who had already created one, you could purchase the book and use theirs. But I didn't know if that's something we wanted to try to do ourselves, and we could do a more basic, like if your kids like Frog and Toad, they can read Henry and Mudge, they can read Poppleton, they can read, we could create a list like that. And if you want to do that, let me know, and we could just brainstorm it together, and you can just leave them in the comments, and we could start another post. But this is where I was just like, this kind of wowed me, especially in today's climate. They talked about reading outside of school, and and for me, it was always, wanting to hold on to your beautiful books because you paid for them out of pocket. And it said, access to books is social justice in action. And if that doesn't stop you in your tracks, I'm not sure what will. So I was like, wow, what a way to frame that. So in chapter 6, it was teach and thinking intensive reading. And I really felt the most part of this was just a summary of things that we have learned over time with Mosaic of Thought and Strategies at Work, and the balanced literacy framework and all those kinds of things. I really felt like it wasn't anything stunningly new. They talk about teaching and comprehension strategies, the gradual release framework, interactive read alouds, build fluency, comprehension, and confidence. The only thing I hadn't really heard, and I'd heard of it before, but I hadn't thought about this, it was attending to signposts. So I think I've got a little bit more with that. And then it's got teaching with videos, images, graphics, and artifacts. So it's just another avenue to access reading, flexible needs-based books, and then sharing digital listening, reading, and viewing. So those are like podcasts and ebooks and those kind of things. And I thought this is something that I remember vividly coming to this thought in about 2009. This like hitting me like a frame, because I remember I was teaching 3rd grade, and I was sitting in actually this chair I'm sitting now, and I was about to teach my kids. I was doing like an interactive reading out loud, and we were talking about it. And one of my kids looked at me and said, "So do you want me to like do questioning, or should I be visualizing right now?" And I was like, oh, I've done it all wrong. I've done it all wrong. Because the whole purpose of teaching the strategies is that strong readers weave these strategies in and out based on what's needed from the text. And so the quote was, but don't dwell on one strategy for too long, because readers simply don't employ one single strategy at a time while reading. They weave strategies together into a tapestry of understanding. And that is completely true. And that moment impacted my reading instruction for 10 years after that, because it was such a big idea. And the ultimate goal of teaching these strategies is not that they can connect and not that they can visualize, but is to give them their own little toolbox, a small repertoire of skills that they can pull out when they're reading, and they can use them to help them construct meaning and build knowledge and understand the book they're reading. So it's to build their own little toolbox for reading comprehension. I'm going to go very quickly over gradual release model. It is teacher modeling, guided practice, collaborative practice, independent practice, and sharing learning. And the post above, I wrote a blog post all about the gradual release framework and seeing it in action. And I did a much more condensed version of that's easier to remember. And I learned it from a presenter, and it was the do model, or the do model. And it was I do, we do, you do. And to me, that was a much easier way to really get all the steps in the framework. The only thing I would add is share your do, because it would be sharing your learning at the very end. But you could see an example of that. And I think in that blog post, I also linked to another blog post where I did it in math. So you could see the gradual release, not only in reading, but also in math. And I love this quote. It said, I now understand, and this was Debbie Miller. This was not Gudis or Ward who said this one. Said, I now understand, they're quoting Debbie Miller, I now understand the importance of releasing responsibility to children much earlier than before, inviting them to have a go, even on day one of a launching strategy. Why so early? Independence is my goal. When we want children to be active, thoughtful, and independent readers, our teaching and their learning situations must be active and thoughtful. And the quote actually went on from there. But I thought it was so powerful, because I think for so long, I was so afraid the kids would drown if I wanted them to try it too early, and I hadn't taught it enough, that I maybe held back from allowing them a chance to give it a go, as she said. And that takes some of the power away from the students and the ability to try and see if they can be independent and ready for it. And that's just not fair. So I really like that, and I know I've been guilty of it in the past, so I thought it was powerful. Another thing that they talked about was building fluency, which can impact your comprehension. Children who are more fluent readers are less likely to spin, because they can decode quickly the text. They're not stumbling over the words, so they're not having to focus their brains literally on figuring out the words. So it's easier to track the text and know what's going on if you're not struggling to figure out the word is attack. You can read it smoothly. So they suggested listening centers, repeated readings, choral readings, and chanting, read alouds, fluency development lesson, which was something specified by Rosinski. It is a model lesson that was included in the back of the book that was fantastic and easy to apply in any age level in the classroom. It's on page 286 of the book. and then echo reading. You may notice this is starred because a couple months ago, I was really talking to another teacher, and we were talking about fluency, and they basically said that they didn't know how to teach fluency other than sight word list. And I was like, well, that's a problem because fluency isn't always about speed. It's more about being able to, expression and prosody and speed. And there's several different facets. I have an entire series on fluency and how you can support it in the classroom on my blog. I should probably link that too, that I wrote several years ago, and it has tips on how to do it in classroom. Most of the blog posts looking back there really hits these things. If you see the stars, I was kind of surprised because I wrote a product, and I'm going to show it to you in a minute, and the product was all about how to actually teach fluency because I wrote it in response to my friend saying she didn't know how to teach students to be more fluent readers. So I'm going to show you it real quick. This is an example of it, and this is an example of the teaching lesson plan and it being explicit in how to read. And it's a 4-day lesson plan for each poem. And the all the poems are taken from the public domain by famous authors. So I liked them because they're actually real poems. They're not just ones that I've written for this purpose, but they're true actual texts that I've organized and put in a way in an order that would make sense for building upon each other. And the actual lesson plans, it's the teacher models it the first day. She teaches example what happens when you come to a comma. That was the example of how commas affect fluency. You have an anchor chart to explain it, or not an anchor chart, but a reference chart to refer to it with your students so they can monitor it and watch and listen how you read that poem. Day 2 is you review what happens when you go to a comma, you model again, but this time kids are going to do that echo reading. So that is exactly what they talked about. Day 3, you again talk about what happens when you get to the comma, but this time instead of echo reading, you are choral reading the poem. And day 4, you are looking at the poem. Each poem has a picture to go with it. It helps with support the comprehension of the poem, and they can answer questions and discuss. There's also a tip with usually a discussion on this teacher slide as well. It is 20 weeks. It's 20 poems, which is 20 weeks of instruction, and there's 7 additional poems that you can also use, and it's 20% off. I did it just for this. 20% off from now until Sunday if you want it, and it's normally I think $9. I can't remember off the top of my head. A link to it is above if that's something that you're interested in. Because I was like, oh, hey, I did something just like that. I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. Now, the thing I really, really liked was this signpost. And I have always been a strong believer in teaching kids to monitor text features and being able to get information from them. And I have written lots about that because I find a lot of value, because that's your whole life is like infographics and tables and charts and maps. So I really feel like it's important, especially for our striving readers, to really give them that key to unlock what they mean. So there's graphic features and text features. But what they talked about is the signal words like meanwhile, likewise, surprisingly, and about how like a strong reader knows when they say likewise, you're going to have something in common with the previous idea, or surprisingly, you're going to get a surprising fact or surprising bit of something right there. And I was like, oh my goodness, I don't know. I may have embedded that in my instruction, but I never explicitly taught that. And there's actually a table in the book, in the section of these signpost, signal post words that you could teach with your kids. I was like, missed opportunity. I loved it. I thought it was great. And they talked about flexible groups. And I loved what they said about it because they did talk about guided reading, which made me feel better. And they kind of talked about it more as flexible grouping, because guided reading is flexible grouping. And here's why. It said if children remain in the same group for an inordinate amount of time, that is not guided reading. And I think this is quoted from Fountain Spinell, which is like, like the big people, I can't find the word, like the authority on guided reading. These fixed long-term groups more closely resemble ability group reading, which leads to labeling and more labeling. The blackbirds, bluebirds, red words, blackbird for the rest of your life, and it's horrible. Research in the sport of ability grouping is sparse to non-existent, so it just doesn't work. That's just the bottom line. If you keep them in the groups for a long time, it simply doesn't work. So if you're going to do guided reading or flexible grouping, these are settings that you can also reach kids in small groups. You could do a true guided reading lesson. You could do a strategy or genre group, which is different than a guided reading lesson. You can do a book club or literature circle. You could do a read, write, and talk, which was kind of like a collaboration where you took a text and they all talked about it together. Inquiry circles, I love that idea. I thought that was very clever. And then old school partner reading, which I loved. If you were looking for a way to make sure kids do partner reading and partner reading well, they had information on how to do it, but I really like how the Daily Five and the sisters talk about how to explicitly teach children to partner read and be active listeners when their partner is reading. One of the things they talked about was a book club or a literature circle and partner reading, and I have something called reading partnerships, which is kind of like a combination of the two, and this is a freebie and a blog post that I shared for free. All of it's free in my blog. The link is above. And it has the very beginning of the packet. It has like why you should do it and how you should organize it. And the idea these are friends, like buddies, can get together and support each other and read a book that they choose together. And it can be a picture book. I wrote it so it doesn't have to be a chapter book, but it can. And instead of having these huge literature circle packets, which do have a place and do have a time, and I even have a literature circle packet because I have done them with younger kids. I have a whole packet just devoted to literature circles for little learners. But this is more of a partnership. So it's almost like buddy reading together. And with this, you create these bookmarks and it says let's read, and it has two places for them to collect their thoughts, and you can put a post-it note on there, and when they find something where it strikes them that they think they want to talk about, they could jot it down and stick it on the book, and it's already ready for them on the book, and they can read the selected amount of text until basically they hit that bookmark or they hit the post-it note, however much text. If it's a chapter book, that could be valuable. If it's a picture book, it could be the whole thing. And there aren't just, I think that I tried to hit lots of the comprehension strategies. I wonder why. I predict that the character changed because she was like this in the beginning, but this like in the end. So if I remember, I think that's in there. So it's just lots of different styles of bookmarks. So it's ever what you want to focus on with your students. That is a freebie. You can find it up there. So how are we going to incorporate these ideas in the classroom? So what could we do with everything that we've learned and really use them and make sure it's meaningful for our kids? That's like the next big idea. How are you going to do that? So I know that some of you have been commenting, and I haven't looked at any of the comments yet because I was waiting for them to all load. So I'm going to come over here and look for them. And I'm so thankful that you guys have hung in there for so long. I know this has been super long with it being so many books. And now I just got to figure out how to make it work because it's not showing me the questions. I may have to pull it up in another window. Let's see. And I know that Chris, while I'm getting it to load, she had a lot of really good questions, and I took a couple notes that I want to share with you guys about that. So I'm going to come back over here and see if it pops up. Here it is. Okay. Angela says, choral reading is great for striving readers to hear good fluency. I also use echo reading with partners. It's excellent, and it's research-based. Rosinsky has done a lot, and in his The Fluent Reader, if you're looking for how to support fluency in your classroom and how to build more fluent readers, he is like, I find that he is like the expert on teaching fluency. So if you're looking for a text, he's a good one, and it's Timothy Rosinsky, The Fluent Reader. Chris says, I love teaching my fluency through poetry, and that is exactly why I created the Teaching Fluency Through Poetry pack, because it's concise, it's short, it lends itself to things like visualization and inferring and figurative language and things that can be more advanced and hard to get to maybe in a larger set of text. And Kelly Martin says, I agree, poems are generally short and promote fluency in a less threatening way. I like that phrase, a less threatening way. Than poetry. Chris says she's not a fan of choral reading, especially with my strivers. They tend to try to copy and not read. And that was something that was interesting too. One of the ways that you can support that is when you have the highlighted text. And my pack does not have the highlighted text, but that would be something that you could easily go back and do. And people have done for years in the past by using pocket charts and highlighting tape and highlighting cards and transparency cards. So that's nothing new. And it's only showing me those 4 comments, but it says on my group that there's 17, so I'm not quite sure where the other comments went. So what I'm going to do is go back to pull up, Chris had a couple other questions and see if I can pull them up. Because I said, go ahead and pull those questions up. She said, how do I get kids to look through the preview stacks? My kids just dismiss books without looking. And I think the bottom line is that you can't just put out books and say, take a look at these and think what you see what you like. They really talked about sitting down with a child and watching the child's eyes, their body language, and seeing what they were interested in. Because you may pick out books they may not want. And I think there's value to that. I think, our goal is to find books for all readers. And I know that there's like, oh, but this kid never wants a book. But it may just be it's not the right book yet. So don't let it get you down. You just got to keep on trying to find the right match. And I think it's developing that relationship one-on-one with a child, because it's a lot easier for a striving reader in a group to be like, I don't like that book. I don't like that book. Because it's threatening and they don't want the chance to fail in front of their peers. If it's one-on-one, it's less threatening. At least that's my experience. This is a great one. How do I get kids to give up, and I love this quote, the Harry Potter dream when they can't even read Cam Jansen? And there's always that kid who wants to go for, Inkheart and Harry Potter and all those kinds of things when they're still a beginning reader because of how it appears to how it looks to the peers, how the other kids view them. And it's tricky. I always had a rule that, like, when we went to the library, you could pick out because they could pick out 3 books. In the last school I was at, they could do 3. So they could pick out any book, and that could be Harry Potter. But the other 2 were books I had to feel they had to read. So if the Harry Potter book made them feel more confident, sure, check it out. It's fine. But the other 2, they were books they wanted to read. And they could read. And also, don't discount. You may be surprised about what the child can read, because especially like books with Harry Potter, there are so many, like maybe they're a kid who has watched the book or the movie 5 times and they've seen the graphic novel in the store, and their mom read it to them already out loud, so it's a familiar text, so you can't discount their experiences. Too. You can always encourage, like, some of the times I would say, well, why don't you take that home and read that with your mom or your dad or your older sister or something like that. And I found that if you give in to that need a little bit, they're not going to stick with it. If it's too hard, they'll put it away and they'll be done. They'll give up the dream eventually. That was not a fight. I often found I would give a little, as long as they would do it within the confines of my guidelines, which were, you got to have some books you can read. You can have that too hard book. Well, let's get some, that's fine. And there's, a purpose for reading that. Maybe you're super interested and you'll slog your way through it and get something out of it. Because there's different purposes for reading, and I think there's value in that. Because that same, like the kid reading the Harry Potter book that can't read Cam Jansen is just as bad as, according to some people, just as bad as the Harry Potter reader going back and reading Cam Jansen. But we forget there's different purposes for reading. Well, yeah, they may be able to read Harry Potter and they may be on a 6th grade reading level, but they really like the Cam Jansen character and it's funny to them, and that's, practicing their fluency and expression, finding humor in text, reading quickly through text, and being able to skim and scan. Those are all valuable skills too. So I'm not saying that your children should be able to have carte blanche to read anything all the time. I just think that we need to remember there's different purposes for reading. And sometimes, especially with those 4th older babies that are very sensitive to their peers, it might be worth it to give in a little bit just so that you can find another way in. So that was how I handled it. How do I help my boys pick books when I hate adventure books and I only really know chick books? I understand. I like a good chick book myself. So what I did is I pulled a couple of resources that I have found. One of them is this book is called The Read Aloud Handbook by Jim Trelease. I would not suggest purchasing this book, to be honest with you. This would be a great one to recommend to your librarian to order for your professional reading library at school, if they would do that. I always got asked my school librarian to order them. She always did. But it has lists and lists, and these are for read alouds, but it's just a good reference for books for kids. But it goes from wordless books, predictable books, picture books, reference books, full-length novels, poetries. It has all different kinds of books, and it has a little synopsis of each of the more in-depth books too, which I really liked. And I like the idea of having wordless and predictable books for some of those striving readers, because it's just a good thing to have, because I think sometimes that's hard to find. So I thought that was something we could always refer back to. In the 3 through 6 version of Fountains and Pinnell's Cornerstone Text, they have, and it only starts at level J, so it would really be beginning 2nd grade, they have a list of books by guided reading level, so that's just another reading resource for you to go through to find text to help you match them to reader, to give you ideas. Another one that I looked up is Pam Allen, and she has an entire professional book called, which I don't have, and I haven't seen it, but I saw it and I was like, ooh, maybe I do need to get it. But it's called Best Book for Boys, and it was K-8 and had book suggestions for boys in those age range. So I was like, that might be a good one, especially to have your librarian order as well. There was another website, and I just Googled. It's Common Sense Media Books for Boys, and it has lists of suggestions for different age groups. And I think it was like K2, 3, 5, 6, 8, different age groups to suggest to your boys. So I was like, well, that's another resource. So I know that I'm into chiclet too. So I totally get it. So those are just places and resources for you to find other books that your kids may be interested in reading. And just because, it says for boys, some of your little girls may not really want to read all about their, pony books and Pinkalicious and all that either too. So Angela Parks Hunt said she'd love to know more about a book tasting. So maybe I can do, I'll try to add that to my list of Facebook Lives, because I could do a whole thing on that, because it's fun to do and it's so easy to maintain. And I think that is all that I can see as far as comments. So if I missed yours, I apologize. And what I'll do is I will come back after I end this live. I will come back and I will answer any questions in the comments. Make sure that you go back to the description of this video and you grab all the freebies, because there's several freebies if you want to look at the poetry pack I put on sale for you guys till Friday. So there's tons of stuff there. I also wanted to show you guys that I have put out my Facebook Live schedule that I'm going. These are all pretty much, except for this the book study book. We have one more meeting, except for the book study. These are all going to be on my Mandy's Tips for Teachers page. But here is my next my schedule of what we'll be doing. So if you look, we will be finishing the book and discussing the rest of the chapters on the 19th. And that will be the final book study session for the end of the book. Then I'm out of town next week because I'm going to the Teacher Pays Teachers conference. And if you look, you'll see I went ahead and added in maybe in that blank for, what is that, the 2nd of August or something like that. I can add in a Facebook Live. It depends because my kids' school starts. So I'm going to have to be real sensitive with their back to school time too as well. But I'm kicking off this series on the 15th. I have a gazillion photographs of my last classroom I was in. And I'm going to take you step by step of each area of the classroom, what I put where, why I chose to put it there, and how I changed it over time. So if that's something, if you're thinking about organizing your classroom and getting ready for back to school, that might be a way to kick it off. And then I'm going to go into some more reading lessons. I've had a great time. If you have any more questions, drop them in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. And I really appreciate you hanging in there with me for like 48 minutes. I hope we all have a wonderful week. Thanks.